Ladies and gentlemen, in this video, I'm going to be doing a historical deep dive on probably the most interesting chess player to ever live. And that is not a title that I assign to a person lightly, given that there are players like Mikhail Tal, who fascinates everybody with his story, his charm, and of course his chess moves. And the player that I'll be covering in today's video is Alexander Alekhine. And even his last name is up for debate on how to pronounce because he was born in Moscow. So you would think it's pronounced Alekhine. He preferred to pronounce it Alekhine. And as an American, we say Alekhine. So you can pronounce it however you would like. I'm going to show you in this video some of his best games because he was a pioneer of a playing style that nobody else was playing in the 1920s and 1930s. But I'm also going to tell you fun and some not so fun facts about his life. This man lived 10 lives in one. There should be movies and documentaries made about him. First of all, let's start from the end of his life. This man is the only player to die as a world champion. Nobody ever took the title from him. He is technically the lineal world champion. He lost the world championship, won it back, World War II happened, and there was never another world championship. That's crazy. And now we go back all the way to the beginning of his life. 1892, born in Moscow, right? World War I breaks out in 1914. This man is arrested because of accusations of being involved in the white movement, which you can read up about, Russian history and World War I. He's arrested because somebody makes like random informant things about him. He's thrown in jail. He survives jail, okay? 1921, this man escapes the Soviet Union because at the time he was married to his second wife, who was a Swiss journalist, and that's the way he gets out of the Soviet Union, and he wants to go and play chess. 1920s, he dominates chess. 1930s, he dominates chess. Becomes the fourth world champion, taking it from Capablanca, who was a legend at the time. In 1924, this man applied for a PhD program and started calling himself Dr. Alekhine. There is apparently no record of him being at this place. It's incredible. 1925, he tries to get a French citizenship. They decline it because they think he's a Russian spy, a Soviet spy. Okay, I mean, fun and not so fun facts. 1935, there's a famous quote about him where he showed up to the German-Polish border and said, "I am Alekhine, chess champion of the world. This is my cat. Her name is Chess. I don't need a passport." Didn't work. That one did not work out for him, all right? And after World War II, due to accusations of being involved with Nazi Germany, he couldn't play any chess anymore. And we're going to get into all that as well. He wasn't allowed to play any chess outside of the Iberian Peninsula, and he ended up dying in Portugal. It's like incredible. Apparently, he also lost all his money in the 1929 crash of the stock market. So I'm going to kind of intertwine these stories. I'm going to show you games from his life today. I don't even know how I'm supposed to... Okay, now when we focus on the chess in particular, I also learned that there are like a dozen variations named after him, and they're not stupid. They're not like ridiculous variations. For example, the Alekhine's defense, e4, knight f6. This opening is played in modern days. I have a course on this opening named after Alekhine. e4, knight f6. And, black goes here. This was just one of the lines. Now, with the white pieces, I learned that there's a million lines. For example, there are two variations in the French defense. There's a variation in the Winoir with bishop b4 where white gambits the pawn on e4. This is a cutting-edge line, played now in 2026 with the backing of engine lines. This is called the Alekhine Gambit. Alekhine Maroczy Gambit. Dude, this man was inventing openings 100 years ago. And then there's another line in the classical French where in one of these main lines, white plays the move h4. This is a gambit. You gambit the pawn here, and then you try to open up this, and it's completely blessed by the computer. It's one of the best moves in the position. This man was playing this back in the day. And the list goes on and on. There's a variation of the Sicilian Dragon where white plays all the normal moves and then retreats the knight. This is called the Alekhine variation. And on and on and on. The Queen's Gambit accepted. d4, d5. c4 takes e4, one of the main lines. I used to play this move, knight f6. That's called the Alekhine system. How could he contribute so much to chess 100 years ago? And as we get into some of the most critical games of his career, I want to stress something. Alekhine was a pioneer of a style, as I said in the intro. He was a cold, calculated, explosive detonator on the board. Tal, from the 1960s and 50s, is known as a creative genius. He had a dynamic intuition, sacrificing pieces left and right, whereas Alekhine, compared to his predecessors in the 20s and 30s, particularly guys like Capablanca, who were systematic, they had the technique, the endgames, he had a controlled destruction about him that nobody could really mirror. Now, this is a game from 1913, maybe? He's like 20 years old. He breaks out into the scene against Grigory Levenfish, who was a legendary grandmaster, trainer, author. Now, this is very fitting. In this game, white plays an old Benoni. Black plays kind of like a Benoni system. White doesn't play this move c4. Alekhine takes as many pawns to the center as possible. This game is over in 20 moves. His opponent plays knight bd7, knight f3, a6, looking to advance with b5, baiting Alekhine into playing e5. Again, this is early 1900s. They're not as good as we are now. It's the truth, especially with the openings. Alekhine's like, yo, man, you can't play chess like this. This just doesn't make sense. I'm going to smash this pawn forward. Black's idea, Levenfish's idea here, was he's going to move the knight, and if the pawn takes on f7, the knight can actually come back and take, and Black is surprisingly safe. But Alekhine plays bishop f4, putting more pressure on this knight, forcing a trade, and now taking with the pawn, which attacks the knight. The knight goes back, and again, you could take and put the king here, but instead of that, Alekhine plays bishop c4, but it's really the ending of this game, which is particularly brutal. Queen b6 appears, Levenfish attacks the pawn, and white has one and only one move for the advantage here. You don't guard this, you guard this. This pawn is important because it takes away squares from the black position. Queen e2 on the board. The audacity to play a move like queen e2. Allowing Levenfish to take this pawn, hitting the rook, hitting the knight. The only way to protect both of those pieces in one move is to play king to d2, because that would defend the knight and the rook would defend the rook. So what do you do when you face a situation where a knight is hanging and a rook and potentially another one? Well, if you're Alekhine, you sacrifice it. Knight to b5, giving up a rook with a check, and another rook will hang, and the knight is hanging. But because Black's king is in the middle and none of the pieces got developed and these squares are controlled, the game ends in 5 moves. Levenfish takes 10 points of material away from Alekhine. Alekhine plays knight c7 and queen to d2 check. Black has to block, white takes, and Black resigns, because knight to e6 is an unavoidable checkmate. And even if you were to play knight takes pawn, I would win with bishop e6 and queen d7 mate. This man beat his opponent with 3 pieces that never made it off the back rank of the board. Now, this was, of course, early days in the career of Alekhine. Now, as I said, this game was played, right before World War I. So World War I is happening. Alekhine is at a chess tournament, winning the chess tournament, obviously, like one does. And then the war breaks out, and there's a bunch of Russian players there. A bunch of them get interned in Germany at like the Mannheim chess tournament in 1914. Alekhine is freed and allowed to go back home, where he starts apparently raising money. Again, historical records are tricky. It depends where you read things from, and if there's any inaccuracies in this video, I do apologize, because there's so many sources nowadays. I wasn't there 100 years ago, but the story is he helped raise money to free the other chess players that were trapped there. Also, apparently, he worked in the Red Cross on the Austrian front during World War I. Like, dude was everywhere. And then when he returned to Russia, ultimately, he was in prison in the Cheka, the Odessa Cheka, which was like the first ever secret service, basically, of Russia. Now, this happened right before, right? This game happened right before. The next game that I'm going to show you, this is also like right after 1921, 1922. He escapes the Soviet Union. He was married 4 times, by the way, which wasn't even included in the fun facts. I don't know if that counts as a fun fact or a not fun fact. Here's another game where he played against Bogoljubov. Now, Bogoljubov was a major rival of Alekhine. Alekhine won the world championship in 1927 against Jose Raul Capablanca, but then in 1929 and 1934, he defended it twice against Bogoljubov. 5 years, he only defended it against the same guy who was clearly elite, but not on his level. And this game is one of the most impressive games that he ever played, and not even involved in a world championship. I think it's from 1922. So, Alekhine liked the Dutch defense, played it a lot. Really fit his style. By the way, I have played a million games that have started like this. It's just crazy he was doing this 100 years prior. Knight c6, knight f3, castles, castles, and black plays d6. And then what he does is he's going to play king h8 and launch some sort of attack against his opponent. By the way, incredible. Again, like back in the day, these guys had such an incredible understanding of chess that they were playing things that we see now. e3, a5, controlling the queen side. And then he played queen e8 and queen h5. Already, black has the makings of a very powerful attack. Ideas of f4 and e4 coming in on this side of the board. Bishop h3, knight g4 with massive mounting pressure. h4 is a very committal decision by white here, stopping the advance, but potentially weakening the structure. Alekhine, again, making some improving moves, retreats the knight. But ultimately, Bogoljubov weakened his structure just a little bit too much. And white is going to be able to, black is going to be able to kind of crack it down. He locks the center. Now with this pawn lock, the bishop, the knight, and the knight really struggle to coordinate. They struggle to move. And the dominance that Alekhine displays in this game is just incredible. So white plays rook d1, h6, locks the center, knight f1. I mean, you can't move. Bogoljubov's basically trying to make a bunker in which black cannot, fully break in. Ultimately, he brings the knight back here. He's ready to start some sort of attack. a4 is played. That square is weakened. Immediately, he goes back to b4 because knights can move back and forth, but a pawn can't. So he controls this. He controls the middle. He controls the left side of the board. Like I said, controlled chaos. Controlled chaos. He wins a pawn. That's his breakthrough. That's his breakthrough. Just like it was a breakthrough in his life to get out of the Soviet Union, right? He's going to bring the bishop back, and then he's going to advance these pawns and go up the board. Now, the way that this game ultimately concludes is unbelievable. He breaks through on this side. His opponent plays knight d1. He plays knight d3, and rook takes a5 on the board, winning a pawn. Alekhine plays b4, attacking the queen. Rook takes a8. So he loses a rook. Now, you look at this position, and you go, well, if I take the queen, he's going to take my queen, and then he's going to, probably the easy thing to do is to take the rook, and then just advance and win. In this position, Alekhine takes the queen. And when his queen gets taken, he pushes his pawn. He allows Bogoljubov to take his rook, take his queen, and take his other rook, one rook, chopping down 19 points of pieces. And at the end, you just play king h7, and this pawn will either take the knight or push, and you can't stop both of those moves. So Alekhine gets his queen back, and now begins a truly humiliating series of events. He plays the knight to the first rank, takes a pawn from his opponent, targets the knight on f1. This would have been mate. So his opponent has to lose the rook for the bishop. He has to lose the bishop for the knight. And now queen e2 appears, and white doesn't have a move. White can't move any pieces. If white tries to play something like knight to h3, you play knight to g4 and make him take your queen to queen again. The same exact pattern as with the c-pawn. So seeing that he can't move his knight because the next move is knight to g4, he has to permanently stop knight to g4. So Bogoljubov pushes a couple pawns, and now he's out of moves. Alekhine moves his king back and forth because white is out of turns. If he moves the knight, he'll lose this pawn. Like knight g3 is going to lose all his pawns. He can't move his rook anywhere because if he moves his rook, let's say to h1, knight g4 is still vicious because this becomes checkmate. And like I said, the worst part of all is he can't move anything. So white has to go here, and now the game ends in beautiful style. We just win all these pawns, and then we bring the queen right back to the e2 square. Because when you take, now the queen can be stopped. But Alekhine calculates that this is a winning endgame. He has more pawns than his opponent. He can simply walk the king to the center, and he's going to win the endgame. He sacrificed his queen like 4 times in the same game, and it was different queens, which is kind of indicative of his life. He was married 4 times. I mean, look at this position. These are the kinds of things that he did to people. I haven't even gotten into probably his most famous game, which was in 1925 against Richard Reti, or as his name is likely pronounced, Richard Reti, also Richard Report, right? Again, at this time, he was applying for the French citizenship. Alekhine, he was trying to represent them, and I think he did in a chess Olympiad. Of course, the 1920s were crazy. There were no world wars, but there was the Great Depression and so on. He apparently was known as Doctor for a little while, but there's like no record from this university in France that he was there. Maybe that's been updated again. When you read things online that happened 100 years ago, I mean, we can hardly agree on history in the last 5 years. 100 years ago, totally up for debate. Again, 1927, he becomes the world champion. I'm gonna show you one of the games that he beat Capablanca, who was the best player in the world in the 1920s, taking the title from Lasker. This is an unbelievable game. This is the controlled type of chaos that Alekhine was known for. First of all, we have a reverse Reti. So we have a reverse Alekhine's defense. Like, this is the Alekhine, except white plays an extra move, g3. Kind of interesting. And then plays knight to d4. Alekhine doesn't respond the computer's way, but he plays, normal moves. Plays bishop b4 check. They trade the bishops. Castles, c4. And I mean, from the opening, I gotta tell you, it looked like Reti was doing Reti things. Reti was a very, very good positional player. And this was the style back in the day. It was very scientific. Whereas when Alekhine brought fire on the board, nobody could play like him. Nobody knew how to beat his style consistently. Alekhine, as I said, I would scatter fun facts throughout this video. Alekhine had the most dominant winning percentage of any world champion ever. Like, people feared him. They really, they feared him back in the day. C6, rook e8, bishop g4. Now, from the early goings here, bishop h3 was on the board, and we offered a trade of pieces. And as you can see, white is mounting pressure on these pawns, b4, b5, a4, a5, and maybe e4 to kick out the knight. These are the next logical progressions of the position. Now something fascinating happens. Something that could have altered history for many years to come. And that is this repetition of moves. All right? That is this repetition of moves. Bishop g4, bishop g2, bishop h3, bishop f3, bishop g4. If in this position, Reti had simply repeated the position and didn't want to continue on because he thought, I'm happy with a draw, this game would have never happened, would have never been featured in this video, would have never been featured in articles, and so on. Reti decided, I don't want to trade bishops. I'm going to retreat over here, which he could have actually done when the bishop was on h3 as well. He decided that it was better to retreat like this, and now the game gets spicy. h5. Alekhine's like, you dare not repeat moves against me? Do you know who I am? I'm going to play h5 and h4, and I'm going to try to take your head off. Now, this is very useful. Number one, king is never getting back rank mated in any skirmish. Number two, we're going to strip some defenses of the white king. Number three, you're about to find out. Here, again, the magical question was, at any moment, could Reti have played e4, just kind of kicked back the knight, and then, it would have been very chaotic, but people were afraid of pushing the pawns near the king against Alekhine. h4, a4, takes. Now, this small little sequence, which removes the h-pawns from the board, destabilizes white's king in ways that you would not believe. It doesn't even look like it did anything. No piece can get to the h-file for black. How do you even get to these pawns? Queen c7, white plays b5. He's just marching down this side of the board. It's everything that I said. bc, pawn takes. And in this position, it wouldn't be a Gotham historical deep dive unless we also got one of these. Alekhine, in this position, sacrificed the rook. Rook e3. What a banger. Rook e3 is an incredible move. Number one, it stops white's attack. White's e-pawn cannot move forward, cannot kick out the knight. Everything is blocked. You cannot take the rook. The queen would then take on g3. If the king goes here, this is mate. And if the bishop blocks, I still take. I threaten the queen, and I threaten mate. You actually can't stop mate. Okay, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is if you take on c6, I'm actually going to take here anyway. Rook takes g3, knight e3 is always there. If the bishop blocks, I'd go knight e3. Say, what are you talking about? Don't I just take? Yeah, bishop h3. There is no defense against the attack. You made all this progress, but you can't do anything because I'm going to go takes. I'm going to get my queen in, and it's game over. In fact, I can just play rook g1 check, sacrifice my rook, and it's mate on g2 before you get to take my rook. Just insane. So, knight to f, after rook e3, the move knight f3 is on the board, blocking the attack. Unfortunately now, white's attack loses all of its steam, and knight c3 comes down with authority, hitting the queen, defended by this rook, which is just hanging. The rook is just, it's a ghost rook. It's standing on a square it has no business standing on. This rook is now going to be on pre, hanging for the entire game. The queen takes on b7. Alekhine doesn't need his queen. How can you possibly sacrifice your rook and then remove your queen from the board like this? Now, if knight takes e2 appears, which is obvious, and the king moves, you can't take the rook. That wouldn't make any sense because then you would lose your rook, and if you count the material here, it's even. It's a completely even position. 2 knights and a bishop each and 2 pawns. So what could possibly be the idea here, and why is this winning for black? Alekhine, when he played rook to e3, and this is what I mean by the genius of controlled chaos, not just dynamic intuition like Tal, calculated, controlled demolition. Rook e3 appeared on the board, and in the ensuing sequence of moves, he had calculated the move knight to e4, leaving the rook hanging for another move. The rook hangs here, and the rook hangs here. If white takes now, then I take this rook, and this rook is hanging, and this knight is hanging. So black is winning, which is why the only move here is rook c4, hitting the knight and then the bishop. So if the knight takes the rook now, after knight takes d2, there is always this problem, and there is always this problem. Okay, so rook c4 creates multiple threats. Pawn takes e3 is still a threat, but now knight takes f2. Now the rook is no longer hanging. It was hanging for 6 turns. Now the bishop is protected, this bishop is hanging, and this is hanging. But that's not the end of the story because there's this. Knight, their bishop goes back to e6, and rook c2. There's an X-ray attack on both knights. So you get out with knight to g4. Here, only move. Discovered attack check on the king. You go here, and now you would think I take the knight with a check. No, because after bishop takes, this is the position. And black is better in this endgame, but not winning. After king h2, the idea is to sacrifice the rook again. Rook takes f3. And in the sequence, we have this, check, here. Take the rook, fork, hit the bishop, and bishop d5. Bishop d5 ends the game with a fork on this knight on b7. Move 42, move 31. Alekhine calculated a forcing 12-move sequence, which if you total up the moves is 24 moves. Of this whole line, rook c4, knight f2, bishop here, rook c2, knight g4, king h3, knight e5, king h2, rook f3, rook e2, check, take the rook, fork, and at the end is this sequence, and white resigns because he is unable to protect his knight. This is 1925. There was 10 more years of this, and this man wasn't even the world champion yet. He was so good. Now, back in the day, the way you challenged a world champion in chess was you had to raise money. Capablanca, there was no FIDE in 1920. Just a random dude was the world champion and was like, if you want to challenge me, you got to bring the money, bring the sponsors, and here are my terms and conditions. Kind of crazy, right? In 1927, the world championship match was held between Alekhine and Capablanca. Alekhine was a dominant force, 1927, Capablanca also. But how do you... This is really unstoppable force and immovable object. Alekhine is the unstoppable force, Capablanca is the immovable object. These are the two best players in the world in the 1920s. Who is going to win? The new French citizen denouncing of the Soviet, revolution and regime that's ongoing over there, or Capablanca, all right? The Cuban star. D4, knight f6, we have a positional battle, a queen's gambit decline. By the way, there's a whole other arc in the 1930s that we're going to get into. In the 1935 and 1937, there was the world championship matches against Oive, the Dutch player. At that time, from 39 to 45, well, we're going to get into it. First, let him become the world champion. So many stories, right? And you could make a 3-part series, on this man. castles. Let's see how he manages to take down one of the players that nobody could take down in his prime. Capablanca equalizing very solidly from the opening, controlled, not letting white really progress. We have c takes, bishop to d3, and the queen steps out of the way. Capablanca has absolutely no problems here. Everything is well controlled. Knight could jump into e4 when he wants. Knight could jump into c4. Rook is here. How does a creative player take calculated strategic risks against the player with no weaknesses in his game? The queen comes out to a5, knight to e2, knight e5. So Capablanca comes here. Alekhine evaluates the dynamic placement of this knight is superior, and this knight jumps into c4. Now, here, the dynamics begin. Both players have spotted a sequence. Bishop takes knight, bishop check, the king makes it into the center of the board. That is what we go for. Bishop takes f6. Taking with the pawn here is crazy. You don't want to weaken your king, so we have this. Now, both guys go for bishop h7. You cannot go here because of this. King to f8, knight d7 check, king e7. And Alekhine, he doesn't take on f6. Capablanca's idea was that if he takes, I'm going to take with the pawn now, and my king is insulated for the rest of the game. Good luck getting to my king. Alekhine's like, you know what? I'm going to put my knight on c5. I'm going to make you make some difficult practical decisions. In this position, according to modern-day analysis, this knight is so strong, Stockfish wants to sacrifice the rook for it, activate this bishop, and begin chopping down the pawns over here. They both saw that. But back in the day, allowing your opponent an extra rook like this and a passed pawn, like dynamic compensation, dynamic skill set, had not evolved to the level that it is now. Rook c5 would certainly be a move many people would consider nowadays. I'm not sure if they would be brave enough to play it, which is why Capablanca kept everything very straightforward and went queen to b6. But this trade allows the bishop to come back, and opposite-colored bishops do benefit the attacking side. Now here, by the way, Capablanca could have ran his king exactly to the square that it was. He could have done that, but he kept his king in the middle of the board. Queen a2, rook c8, b3, we kick out the knight, and queen d2. We need a long battle against Capablanca. We're not just going to blow him off the board like the other opponents. He understands the style too well. King d7. He is ready to bring the king over here. If we trade a bunch of rooks and queens, this is simply going to be a draw. The boys have the same type of pawn structure. So we have bishop to b1, keeping the tension, keeping some decisions open. Bishop here, knight f4. At some point, we're going to get into a wrestling match. Knight to d3, now b4. Now we're going to go here with the knight. That's our idea. That's our small little window of opportunity. The rook infiltrates, queen b2 hits the rook, and the knight disconnects the pieces. Capablanca here thought that after bishop takes, he was safe. But what he failed to realize is the rook is stuck here with this queen. And very few people have been able to do this against Capablanca. f4 attacking the queen. He gets rid of the defender of the rook. And now, as always, a flair for the dramatic. He wants to go rook c1, so the rook can't move because of this pin. He can't do that because this would be a check. So he plays king to f2, and the threat is rook c1. And after queen f6, g3, the game is over. Because rook c1 is unstoppable, Capablanca has his pieces completely tied together. There is nowhere to move the rook because the queen would lose a defender. There's nowhere to move the queen because it needs defense. It needs defending, and it can't be defended. Very few people have managed to make Capablanca tie his pieces together like this. And it was, in fact, Alekhine who would beat him down in 60 and 70 move endgames that were dynamic with the heavy pieces on the board. And he got the job done. Rook c1, and Capablanca just threw in the towel. He's stuck. He can't move here. Rook c2 check. There is no answer to this pin. And Alekhine did become the world champion in 1927. And he demanded the same things of Capablanca, is the story that Capablanca was demanding of him. There was a period of time Alekhine wouldn't play in a tournament if Capablanca was invited. So, you know, chess players have been very particular for centuries, right? This is basically how the story goes. Now, the last game of the video it's not like a crazy famous game, but there is a tactic that is involved in this game that is literally named after Alekhine to this day. It's called Alekhine's gun. Not an actual one, despite all of his wartime involvement. He lived through 2 world wars. I mean, really. people who were born in the early 20th century are tougher than anybody. You know, I'm going to show you this game against Aaron Nimcevich, also a legendary player of the early 20th century, author of the book My System, which is recommended to people, but it's a tough read. It really is. But it's certainly up there. And the whole chapter of Alekhine's life, from late 1930s to World War II, and him ultimately passing away. I'm going to get into it also after this game is over. The story goes that because he was the world champion and because so many territories of Europe were occupied, articles came out, authored by Alekhine, that, you know, given the times of World War II, they were anti-Semitic, denouncing other chess players who were Jewish. Now, there's actually historical debate and context around those circumstances. A lot of people say, though, you know, it's got the name on it, and those were his real views. And some people were saying he was protecting his family. I believe his fourth wife was French, had properties and wealth stored in France, and he was doing what he could to survive. That's the debate, all right? But after World War II, he wasn't allowed to participate in any tournaments outside of the Iberian Peninsula. And in the Iberian Peninsula, he spent the 1940s as the official German representative. Again, I wasn't around, right? You can read up all this history, and it was just fascinating for me to see this. Like, to see the involvement, you know, the loyalty to this and that, and just his life is just a crazy, crazy life. He really could be the most interesting chess player who ever lived. There is Sultan Khan, who is obviously also just an unbelievably incredible story. Also, Alekhine was involved in the training of a ton of different talents, many of whom were actually Jewish, by the way, and that's why people say that the anti-Semitic angle isn't as straightforward as it seems. He also helped train the first ever Spanish chess grandmaster, which is just incredible. Anyway, with all that in mind, I'm just dropping facts on you because I love this story and I found it so incredible. So in 1930, Alekhine played against Nimcevich. They played the winner where he did not play his gambit. So he played e5, c5, bishop to d2, which is, by the way, a modern line. And the point is that after pawn takes, you go knight to b5, and you try to occupy the d6 square. So black actually has to move the bishop back in a lot of these positions. In fact, the best move here is not to take. It's to go knight e7, which they knew back then. And Alekhine still went for the d6 square. Then he built up a huge center. Knight f3, and then he went a4 and b4. Just, you see the type of style? Like, guys back in the day were not playing like this. He was a totally unique individual. C takes. Bishop b7, he gets the knight to d6. Black now has to do something about it. But he would make people play absurd moves. f5 is not a comfortable move to play here. You now have no more mobility with black. He can't move anything. You have to try to land knight c8 to get rid of the knight. It's probably not going to happen. He goes knight c8, but he's going to lose his bishop and get completely restricted in the meantime. Bishop b5, knight e7, and now the breakthrough has to happen over here, and if white is able to break through, he's going to win the game. Which is why Alekhine, in this position, set up the rook, and then he was like, wait a minute. After all this, why don't I bring my queen, bring my rook, and put my queen behind them? And this, to this day, and you can try to implement this in one of your games, is called Alekhine's gun. They wrote an article about it. He didn't name it that. He didn't sell t-shirts with that name on it. That's what you would do now. You would just drop ship a bunch of t-shirts to people and run Instagram ads. Life was a little more refined 100 years ago. You would play queen, and nobody had ever seen this before. So they were like, this is Alekhine's gun. And how do you break through? Look at Nimcevich holding the fort. Well, you break through like this. You play bishop a4, you play b5. Black doesn't have enough space here to survive this position. He just simply cannot maneuver his pieces in a way. h4 is just brutal. It's just like absolutely restricting everything. Nimcevich resigned because he straight up cannot make a move with any piece. Like, white could have went b5 here, but then this would have had too much defense. So h4, if any of these pieces move, you lose the game. This, you lose this. This, you lose the queen. This, you lose the knight. The king, I go here, and now you don't have defense here. So really, the only thing you could do is move the pawns. Then he's just gonna go king h2 and king g1, and you're not gonna have any more moves left. Alekhine, I said, he liked and played with a humiliating type of game. I mean, the things that he did to his opponents, brutal stuff. And that brings me to the conclusion of this video. You know, like I said, incredible, just incredible style. He's been called a sleeper pick for one of the best chess players of all time, especially given his era. Guys like Kasparov and Fischer have talked about his influence on the game. I thought Tal might have had some influence, might have been influenced a little bit by his chess as well, but I couldn't find anything concrete. Tal was definitely kind of his own mind when it came to chess. But yeah, the story goes that he died in 1946 in Portugal. He spent the last few years of his life in Portugal playing individual matches against Spanish players, Portuguese players on the Iberian Peninsula. And even his death, they say, comes from some unclear circumstances. There are some reports that it was a heart attack, he choked on meat, and so on and so forth. So this man really might have been one of the most fascinating chess players to ever walk the earth, if not the most. 2 world wars, imprisoned by different countries at different times, 4 different marriages, defeated basically every important chess player of the early 20th century. Potential World War II affiliations. Yo, Netflix, really, pick this up, man. I get Timothy Chalamet to play it or something. I don't know. I don't know what you guys want to do. This is mind-blowing. His chess, incredible. I will cover some more of his best games. Not as like spicy maybe as Tal, but a style that nobody knew how to deal with. I'm gonna stop talking now, because anything I add will take away from his legend. That's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed. Do let me know if you want more historical coverage of chess players, and get out of here.